time in our lives, and I hope that everybody is dealing with it well. I know for myself, for the first 2 weeks, it was quite difficult for me to get into the rhythm of things. I was sort of taken aback by just the novelty of the whole situation. And the first week, I'm sure a lot of you experienced as well. Nobody knew what was going on. We were just sort of beginning to try to plan for the future, for the immediate future, and for a little bit farther on. And so it was very hectic. What can we do? Can we live stream? Can we record some things, etc., etc. And then as time went on, and about as quickly as things evolved as time went on, and more things got canceled. Majority of, or I should say, all of our concerts, the quartet concerts, got canceled, and all of my teaching as well, moved into the online realm. So it took a little bit of getting used to, but it's been this is the new normal, I suppose. So I hope that everybody's doing okay. Wow, okay, so we have our first question already. But just to finish up my spiel, I think it's been, I've been spending just crazy amounts of time on my phone, on my computer. Probably need new prescriptions because my eyesight is getting worse. But it's been besides all the stupid things you see, a lot of what artists have been doing has been quite inspiring. Watching like the living room concerts and stuff like that has been really great, and I draw inspiration from all these other people who remain motivated. And so after the first 2 weeks, I sort of had to snap out of it and sort of plan for a step forward. So I started practicing again, getting back into sort of this kind of mindset and thinking about music. I've been reading a lot, especially about music and other things that I've been putting off. And so I think that time off, those 2 weeks, was good because whenever I take time off from playing, I can sort of go back and sort of start new good habits. All of us develop certain bad habits as we play, certain ways that we get very comfortable with, and as our lives get busy and we play concerts and we teach and all that stuff, we stop thinking perhaps, or stop evaluating ourselves as critically as we know we should sometimes. And so it's been a sort of very good wake-up call for me. So I've been playing scales and doing etudes and learning new pieces and keeping myself busy in that way. So I hope that you guys have been sort of inspiring yourselves as well and self-motivating as much as you can. Okay, so let's see. Question from the YouTube Live. What artists have been most influential to you in your life so far? In what ways have they affected your approach to music? Well, that's sort of very hard and very easy to answer in a way. I mean, growing up, I started playing the cello when I was 6 years old, and of course, being an Asian person, learning the cello in America, the influence of Yo-Yo Ma was incredibly strong. And even to this day, I feel like he is really the one musician who really really loves to just communicate, and just so effortless and so genuine in his approach. And I find a lot of inspiration in that, and I try to emulate that as much as possible. In terms of my own personal development, obviously my teachers, Paul Katz, Larry Lesser, Myung-Hwa Chung in Korea, all these were really, really influential to me. And then as I delved into the quartet world, I know that I was really inspired by, the Cleveland, the Takash, the old original Cleveland especially it's really, really beautiful. All these quartets, and then right now I'm really, really inspired always by the playing of the Hagen Quartet. just the ways in which they use their vibrato, the way they use your bow, has made me think a lot about how I can sort of do that and find even more expression and color and nuance. And yeah, so that's been really, really good. Okay, let's see, I guess I just scroll up. Okay. Let's see, so to address the first question that came up from Luis Alvarado, what do you think about ancient historic cellos and recently handmade ones? You know, I don't know if ancient would be the word I would use. I play on a fairly old cello. It's a Giacomo Rivolta cello, made in 1844 in Milan. He made a lot of violas and a lot of cellos, and this cello I found at Ruining Shop in Boston, and I've been playing on it since 2004 or 5. And so, like most old Italian cellos, it has a great golden sound. It has a lot of intensity. It has a lot of focus. Perhaps a laser-like sound where it sort of penetrates, as opposed to something that's a little bit fatter and bassier. And I've really enjoyed it, and I'm still sort of, the cello is very temperamental. I swear, when I don't play on it as much, it doesn't enjoy it, and it takes me a while. It takes a cello a while to warm back up to me. But I think, you know, playing on new cellos or cellos that have been made recently, I find that especially with really, really good quality ones, just the palette of color that they have and the depth of color as well, I find really, really inspiring. I would love to find a nice modern cello that I can treat a little bit more forcefully than the cello I have now, just because, you know, you don't want to be banging on it and all that stuff too, just because it's very old, but what can you do? So I think there's value in both. I know in my quartet, Ken and I play on old instruments, and Dan and Jessica are first violinists and violists. They play on instruments that were made within the past 10 years, and those sound really, really great. There's a lot of color and nuance that they can really get out of those instruments. Okay. Let's see. Okay, here's another question. How does one go about working on the second movement of the Elgar Cello Concerto, especially with the spiccato stroke? Let's see. You know, I think students come to me sometimes, and you know, when they play something that is off the string, they'll usually really make an effort to play off the string. You know, stuff like that. And I actually feel that you shouldn't work, that you don't have to work to make your string or make your bow come off the string. I feel like all spiccato strokes are generated from a legato stroke. Something that is much more on the string, and as you increase the speed, the bow will naturally come off the string. And then if you want it to bounce even more, you can sort of lighten the bow pressure just a little bit, making sure that you're not always playing with the same amount of density as you would if you wanted it to really be sticky. The bow, obviously the hair is quite flexible and it goes up and down, and I think, and the stick obviously is flexible as well, regardless if it's a sort of a, you know, hard stick or a much more supple one, and I feel like it will be able to catch the bounce or the buoyancy, I guess, of the string and come off the string like that. So, you know, with anything like that, I would suggest you really practice it sort of slow, and slow is always good too, because with something phrase it in a very melodic and almost very lyrical way, and really find the shape, the contour, and how you want to phrase it. And then as you speed it up, don't even worry about the stroke, spiccato stroke. I feel like it's just going to come off the string, and I feel sort of practicing in that way also gives you much more inflection. You don't want to be just off the string or suddenly on the string, where you want to inflect, perhaps something like that. The bow, how you use the bow and the length of bow that you use is going to change somewhat. You might not be able to actually see it, but hopefully that's what's happening. And I feel like basing your spiccato stroke on a much more legato stroke will give you that flexibility. Okay. Let's see if there is another question. Have you ever experimented with practicing in the dark? One of my teachers before he took me on as a student so he could see how I see. Interesting. I'm a cellist. I see. I'm a cellist who is totally blind. Sometimes if I want a student to pay particular attention to sound, I will have them close their eyes or put on a blindfold and just focus on really listening. I do this with permission, of course. Yes, I think there's really immense value in that. By taking away one sensory organ, the logic goes that something else will become enhanced, right? And so I feel like sometimes if you close your eyes, then you really just have to focus on the tactile sensation of playing the instrument, and really you have to really be attuned to what's actually coming out, because you can't actually see, right? So I've actually never done that or asked my students to do that. I guess I've never felt entirely comfortable, but certainly I've done that. Okay, here's two anecdotes. One time we were playing the quartet, it was early on, we were playing for Martha Katz, and we were playing Martha Strong and Katz, and we were playing the slow movement of Opus 135, which is very, very spiritual. And so, I think we were working on such a technical level. How do we play together? How do we play in tune? How do we attack notes together? And she saw that, and she was like, you know what? It's just, we tried different ways. We tried turning our chairs around so we don't see each other, and then we tried, just shutting off the light. And so we can really, instead of trying to just see and just to sort of, just to be with each other just so physically, what would happen if we just opened our ears and just sort of expanded our way of listening? And I don't know if it was any better, but it certainly helped us to listen in a much more different way, in a much more attentive way. And the second anecdote, if I may, around that time we were playing in Italy, and it was sort of a nighttime concert, maybe at 9 or 10 p.m., something ridiculous like that. So we were playing in this courtyard. We were playing Bartók 6, and during the slow movement of that piece, the power just went out. And thankfully we had, it was even before we were playing on iPad, so we didn't even have, we couldn't, it wasn't backlit, so we can't see anything, right? And so we were able to go through without stopping, and thankfully they restored the power in like 2 or 3 minutes. It felt like 30, but I remember at that moment all the anxiety that I felt just washed away, because we couldn't stop, right? And we just had to trust each other, trust in our muscle memory, and trust in each other, right? And really, really listen. If somebody did something else, then we would have to be with them. And I think that was really, really educational and a really, no pun intended, an eye-opening experience for me. Okay. I'll try to keep my answers a little bit shorter. Let's see. From Hayden, what are your thoughts on the differences between playing in a quartet and playing solo works? That's really interesting, and something that I've been thinking a lot in these 4 weeks. Obviously we can't play with other people so much, and the quartet, we haven't played together since the beginning of March, and so I've started, actually, I mentioned at the very beginning of this session that I started practicing, when I started practicing again, sort of playing more scales and sort of building up my facilities as a cellist. And another thing that I've been doing is I've been learning new solo repertoire. I mean, there's so many pieces out there for solo cello that are not Bach, that are, incredible pieces and really, really engaging. And I've been having a lot of fun just sort of delving into it. I think, obviously, when playing with others, you have the other part for reference. But I feel like playing a solo piece is sort of, I approach it in the same sort of way, right? What is this part? What is, with, even with Bach or anything like that, there's going to be voicing. What is a primary voice? What is a secondary voice? And what is melodic function? What is more of a rhythmic function? All these questions that I would have in ensemble playing, it's sort of distilled into a much more focused solo way. And certainly I think what I've learned through quartet in how to inflect my sound, in how to balance, all those things I think I can apply to solo playing as well. And so it's not just extroverted, solo playing all the time, but I can play with much more, I feel like, sensitivity. Yeah, obviously they're different, but I think one informs the other. Okay. Any comments regarding the Handmade cello solo sonata? Well, without more specificity, I think it's a great piece. I learned it, I think, in grad school, and Handmade's language is great. It's so expressive, in a way, very mathematical, but very, very expressive, and it's a lot of very gestural, and he actually writes quite beautiful, evocative, slow movements, and I've enjoyed playing it. Okay. Is there any platform that would work for playing chamber music with others while in isolation? Even a duet would be nice. Is there any way to make Zoom or FaceTime work for that? I haven't had any luck with that. There was an app that was brought to my attention a few days ago called Jam Kazam. And I was also informed about a day after that they ran out of funding, and so the platform is really, it's not very good. But I think what their intention was great, where with actually almost no latency, they were able to sort of play and jam with others. There were band tracks, like the Beatles or anything like that, where you could isolate the different instruments and then just play over it, and you can invite a friend and to play. But with anything, internet latency is not very good, right? And so I think it's always a challenge. I think with the lessons I've done over Zoom or FaceTime or anything like that, I feel like it's not possible to produce sound and to hear it at the same time. Yeah, and so I actually haven't had any luck. Perhaps someone can invent something for that. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the session, I actually can suggest some apps and some programs. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with them, but just in terms of playing with others, and this other being AI, and there's obviously some dubbing apps too, where you can sort of play multi-track over yourself, and a lot of people have been doing that, which is interesting, but obviously not the same as playing with others. Okay. Can you share any thoughts about how and when to distribute weight in the feet and shifting your center of mass in general, for instance, at the tip of the bow on the A string? Okay. Let's see, distributing weight to the feet. I feel like you can't see my feet right now, but for me okay, let me start with this. It's always great, it's always important playing any instrument or doing really anything that you're really grounded, right? And so I was always taught that I should sit on the edge of my seat so I could, and have my feet grounded so I could stand up at any time. And so my feet are grounded and the cello just comes in between my legs like that. Okay, so between the two legs, I feel like the left one is probably maybe, I don't know about more important, but it aids in stabilizing the cello so it doesn't move back and forth. And so I do this too. I fold my feet, underneath my chair, and it's when you're playing, when you're practicing or whatever, maybe it's okay. But if you really, really want to feel centered, and you want to feel like your core is engaged, both literally and sort of figuratively, I think it's really good to have both feet firmly on the ground. And then, okay, so the next part of that question was distributing the feet, sitting your center of mass in general. I sort of alluded to that with the core. Even if you shift, you go like this, or you go this way, or you lean back and you're really into it or whatever, as long as your core is engaged and you feel connected to the cello, I think, and you feel like you can use gravity to sort of feel like you're sinking into the cello at all times, I feel like maybe that's something to focus on. Okay, and then center of mass at the tip of the bow on the A string. Yeah, that's a really difficult position, right? Here. So, I don't know if you can see. Yeah. So, I'm not a very big guy. I'm 5'4", 5'5", and my arms are not very long. And so it was a real effort for me learning how to play with a straight bow or maintaining a consistent straight bow at the tip, or especially on the A string and the C string. And I did a lot of practice in front of the mirror and had a lot of feedback from that. With the A string, obviously, in order to keep the bow straight and parallel to the bridge, we have to go out this way, right? And so I used to think, I used to struggle with, oh, okay, so I'm extending this way, but my arm is straight now, and I have no, I feel like it's locked and I have no strength. And so, I encourage other students who are struggling with this, I encourage them to do this. Try that, keep going, and then instead of thinking that you have to move your bow all the way, or move your arm, you can move your cello too. And so I moved my cello a little bit, but mostly what I did was I sort of, as I went out with my bow hand, I sort of went the other way with my left, or with my left side of my body, I suppose. If I didn't do that, I would end up something like that. And my wrist is bent like this, like that. It's not good, and that, all the strength is cut off at the wrist, and there's no power, and the way I grip the bow, I'm really gripping because I don't want to lose it. So I think if you just think this way, as your arm goes out this way, maybe your the left, you can move the cello a little bit to the side, and in that way, again, the left side, the left leg is really important to keep the cello from slipping like that, yeah, and to really feel like you're still connected to the cello. Okay. What platforms or app do you recommend for rehearsal in these times of isolation? For rehearsal? Let me think about that, and I will address that later. Okay. I saw your performance at Amherst College. It was a true pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much. Another question. How did you go about getting yourself out there for performance opportunities? Did you get yourself a manager or do it yourself? You know, everybody's path to a career, or I don't know, what you would define as a successful career, is different. And I started on early with the quartet, and we sort of went more or less a conventional route. Once we decided, I guess it was around 2005 when we were applying for grad schools. We started in 2002. When we were applying for grad schools, we decided we were spending a lot of time and energy and effort together, more than anybody else really around us was doing it for chamber music credit at New England Conservatory. And so, you know, we realized that we really enjoyed, obviously, what we did and had a real passion for the string quartet, and we wanted to pursue it as a career opportunity. And so we auditioned for specialized grad school programs. We ended up at the New England Conservatory with Paul Katz. But around that time also, we did a bunch of competitions. We auditioned for... and the ones that I should say that sort of propelled us forward was winning Concert Artists Guild, which is a pre-professional management agency where they really advise you on how to sort of set yourself up well and how to promote yourself, and they sort of manage you and get you concerts. And their goal is to sort of sign you on to more professional management. We did a bunch of competitions, and we're fortunate enough to win a couple. And so... you know, we were sort of able to sort of get the momentum going in that way, get more concerts, have more recognition, you know, get invited to record a CD, and then, you know, our platform just gets a little bit that much more wider. Certainly, I think things have changed since I was an undergraduate. It's already depressing back in the early 2000s. You know, with the advent of social media, you know, anybody, and we see it, right, on Instagram, on Facebook, that people are just recording themselves and sharing. It's this sort of sharing, perhaps oversharing culture that we live in, but, you know, there's many, many ways to sort of communicate what you do and to share with others what you're passionate about. And so I would say, there's no one way to do it, and just be creative and follow your instincts. Yeah. Let's see. What importance do you give to the left arm in the transfer of position when one has a short arm? Okay. Do you give to the left arm in the transfer? Oh, I see. Okay. I see what you mean. I assume this is dealing with shifting, and we go up here, I guess. Something like that, yeah? So one thing that won't help is if the cello is too far away from you, right? And so you want to make sure, again, that it's really sort of sitting here, whether it's, you know, long end pin or short or whatever, that you really feel like you can hug the cello, right? And we're hugging the cello, the body of the cello. I can hug it like this with my left arm, and you see how already my hand is already sort of here. My fingers are already, you know, up here. And so you talk about transfer of the left arm, transferring positions or shifting positions. I would say as long as you lead with your arm, always lead with the arm, with this, right? And as you go up the fingerboard, try not to change the position of your wrist or the way your fingers, the angle of approach. Make sure that it's very, especially up here, that it's very square. And I don't mean sort of square perpendicular to the fingerboard. You want to think that you're perpendicular to the ground, where you're using gravity to allow the fingers to sink into the cello. I like to think that I'm sinking into this, you know, into this fingerboard, into this plush. I think Paul Katz describes it as a plush velvet pillow or something that we're sort of sinking into. And so if you think about that and think that you're shifting and changing positions by your arm, and your fingers just happen to be in that position, that will actually improve the accuracy of your shifts and make sure that you play without a whole lot of tension. I see a lot of this, and I was guilty of it myself as well, right? Because we're leading with our fingers, it's much more unstable because we're changing the position of our of the angle of our hand to the fingerboard. So you really, really want to keep it as consistent as possible and always lead with the arm. And I promise, even people with short arms, I think you'll be able to manage that. Yeah, unless you have an abnormally large cello. Okay, next question from Anna. What advice would you give to someone who is trying to stay in this life as a musician, but is scared of the difficulty of really making it? Man, that's a really tough question. I think that's a very tough question. I think you have to ask yourself why you do what you do. One question my dad asked me that way back when I was little, that always stuck with me is, why do you play? Why do you practice? Do you do it for yourself, or do you do it for other people, right? And I think what music means to you is very important. It's something that you need to ask yourself, and then I think if you have the talent for it, if you have the potential for it, I think people will, or hopefully your teacher will be honest with you and be able to tell you, right? And then I think if you are deemed to have the talent for it and the potential, and you have the discipline, and but most importantly the passion, right? The passion for it, then I would say go for it. Yeah? So with all that being said, I think, I grew up, surrounded by musicians. I went to, music school, private music school from, junior high, and then I went to pre-college, I went to conservatory. I've been always sort of in this music mindset, and because for better or for worse, I knew that it was always something that I always wanted to do. But after coming to Harvard, and which is essentially a liberal arts school, and seeing these students who, some of them are so proficient and so great at what they do, yet that's not their major. Or they might have two majors, two concentrations, and they might major in computer science or biology or something else that they have a real talent or a desire to do. And that actually made me really rethink my life choices. But I think don't ever box yourself into doing just one thing, right? If you think, oh, I'm a musician, I'm going to be a musician, and this is all I know, then you're already sort of limiting yourself. It's one thing to really be focused and to have that drive and discipline, but if you have other passions, if you have other things that you're good at and that you're passionate about, why not pursue that as well while pursuing your love of the cello or music or whatever it is. Because perhaps, there's ways that they can sort of merge, your passions can merge. And if nothing else, music should always, I think, is good for the soul and is nurturing, and so you can always play for yourself as well and sort of find a lot of fulfillment and satisfaction while being able to support yourself and eat and have a roof over your head as well. So I think these are really, really important questions, and you just have to be real with yourself and surround yourself with people who can be real with you, I think. And then having that conviction and that passion, I think, is very important. Okay. What are a few core principles you encourage your students to focus on in the practice room? Core principles. Number 1, slow is fast. So, never rush anything, and just because you want to, you have to prepare something for a lesson or for a concert or whatever, and you rush through it, like I mentioned at the very beginning of our session, that just creates bad habits. I think in order to do anything right, you need to just be very deliberate about it, very deliberate and very disciplined, and then as you get more comfortable, you know, what is practicing? We're training our muscles and we're training our ear, right? And so sort of doing that all in having the capacity to sort of process everything, I think that is the fundamental step. And so starting slow and building it up, I would say, is one of my core principles. And so there's a lot of things that tie into that, such as, you know, habits, and, you know, repetition makes habits, right? And so bad repetition makes bad habits, right? And so another, I guess, core principle is always just use your ear, right? Again, that ties into creating bad habits, right? Always listen, and it's better to have focused practice, intentional focused practice, than it is to just play and just, you know, fill in the hours, yeah? And so I would say those are my main principles. I would say in terms of cello, straight bow, and, you know, and with shifting, I would say always shift a little bit sooner than you think you have to, right? There's no jam shifts. So always sort of prepared, and give yourself enough time to shift, I would say, okay? Okay, question from Yoshi. Related to a previous question, could you talk about tips, if any, about downward shifting from higher to lower positions? Sometimes I feel like my body leaning back a bit too much or tight and off balance. I'm an adult learner if this matters. Okay, so downshifting, right? Again, same principle. Making sure you don't change any of these angles or do anything weird, right? One thing that always helped me when I was little, when I was young, that I learned was that when you shift, you should go and like you're pointing to your nose, like you're going like this, yeah. And so if your arm opens up as you're shifting upwards, then you can think the opposite. Not that it's closing, but it's just coming closer to your body. And in that way, I don't know if I would characterize it as leading with the fingers, but certainly more so than in the downshift than with the up. You don't want to ever lead with the fingers going up, but going down, perhaps you can think. Think about the role that your elbow plays as well when you're shifting down. Yeah. Okay. Excuse me. Have you ever come across a situation where you felt you weren't getting the most out of your practice, and what did you do to fix it? Okay. Out of my practice. Just take a break. Just stop. I think when you feel like you're hitting a wall, I think it's good to just sort of take a step back and reevaluate what you're trying to do. I find that making macro goals is very, very helpful, right? If you have like a big thing to do, like let's say I have to do my taxes, but then, you know, you tell yourself every day, oh, gotta get to my taxes today, gotta get to my taxes today. But then it's much easier if you actually make it into a bunch of smaller tasks. Like today, oh, okay, I'm going to figure out how many miles I drove. I will do that today. Today I will, you know, figure out all my utility bills, you know, stuff like that, and just sort of breaking it down into bite-sized chunks, right? And it's good for our sense of accomplishments as well, right? So with the practice, instead of saying, okay, today I'm going to work on Bach, that's what I'm going to do. Okay, today I will work on Bach Prelude. Okay, well, great. So you played it through, now what? You know, so today I will work in a very specific way. I will figure out the form and the shape that I want. Or today I will focus on intonation. Or today I will focus on good sound. Just sort of having these goals for yourself, I think makes your practice much more focused. And because you're already approaching music in this very disciplined way, I feel like you will be much more engaged, and at the end of the day you'll feel that much more fulfilled, where you actually felt like you achieved something. So, okay. I hope that was helpful. What alternative career choice might you have followed if you didn't study music? Thank you, Sasha, for that question. I guess the question was what would I have done? Man, I don't know. I like working with my hands, so maybe something where I'm building something, or I don't know, something like that. Yeah. That's a very topical question, actually, because I've been thinking a lot about that these days. What if I can't ever play music again? What if, what if, right? And so what would I do? And I don't know. Right now I've become a professional, I feel like a professional caretaker for my child. Well, I guess that's what I do. And I'm getting better at it. I don't know if I could choose that as a profession, but with anything you do, the more you keep doing it, the better you get at it, right? Okay. Let's see. Okay, so I think, maybe you could have been a luthier. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's something that would interest me as well. I certainly am interested in all the different cellos, sort of alluding to that question about, old cellos or new cellos. I think making cellos too, right, would be something that would be great. Yeah, great. Okay. So, in this lull of questions, I just wanted to, maybe this is a good moment to share with you guys some of the apps that have come to my attention. And again, I imagine that a lot of you, if not all of you, are aware of this. I'm not always at the forefront of knowing things, but two apps that use AI to sort of track you while you play that I learned about. One's called Cadenza Live. Someone told me that got discontinued, and I haven't tried out the app myself, but when going to the website, I saw that it was still up there. The web address, I think, is metamusic.ai, META music.ai. And the other app, which I actually tried experimenting with, is called My Pianist, and that is My Pianist, M as in Mary, MY Pianist.app. And so those both of those apps use AI to track you while you play. In the case of My Pianist, I think it was developed by pianists, and there's a bunch of string repertoire on it, and I experimented with playing Swan. They have Schubert Arpeggione, Schumann. I think all of his cello stuff, and you can adjust the sensitivity level of how they follow you, and you can adjust the tempo. And so you're looking. I think you need a tablet or an iPad in order to use it. But it sort of tracks you while you're playing in real time and sort of adjusts your playing, and it's scarily effective. There's some defects to it. If you don't hold a note long enough, I feel like it'll stop, which is kind of annoying. But it's at least something to do, right, in the interim while we wait. And then I see that there's a lot more questions, but let me just finish. In terms of dubbing over yourself or multi-tracking, I know that people are using GarageBand if you have iOS, Mac. Some other apps that come to my attention are Audacity, or Reaper, or Acapella, or BandLab. And these are all things you can sort of experiment with and just, maybe just a way to create music with yourself in this time of social isolation. Yeah, okay. All right, so there have been some additional questions. Do you have any advice on expanding a cellist's vibrato color palette? Sure. I think, and maybe this is one of my core principles. In fact, it is. I think vibrato should never be automatic. You should not play and think, okay, I need to always vibrate everything. I think that most color and nuance and inflection is caused by the bow, by how the density, how much weight we have on the string, about the contact point, where the bow is in relation to the bridge and the fingerboard, and the speed in which we play. And all these varieties, all these variables, I should say, create different color and nuance. And then I like to explain as the bow creates, with the bow we have a 24 box of crayons, right? And then with the, and so already with 24 crayons, right? There's so many colors and vibrancy, and nuance and shade and tone that you can create just with those 24 colors alone. But then once you add the vibrato, all of a sudden it becomes a 120 count crayon box, right? And so the first point is I would say, and I tell my students this too, try it without any vibrato, because your vibrato is getting in the way of the expression, right? So try to see what you can do with the bow to create the inflection that you want as much as possible, and then once you've done that exercise, I think you'll approach the vibrato in a different way. In terms of how to work on vibrato, I think I like to just turn on the machine, the metronome, put it maybe at 60 or 70 or whatever, and maybe I'll try it for you guys. I hope I can do this. So let's see, I'll put it on 60, let's say 66, right? And so I'll try. I don't know if that came across, but basically I started with 1 oscillation, and then 2, 3, 4, and then and so on and so forth. So that's one way to really develop the sense and really feel this tactile sense of your finger vibrating. I think, and that'll just sort of not only widen literally and figuratively how you use the vibrato, but it'll sort of define, I guess, all the different colors again in your box. One thing to note, and I'm sure that you've possibly heard this all before, but I think it's worth mentioning, is where do you think, if the oscillation of a vibrato, I'll ask my students this, how does it go? Do you think it goes above the note, above and below the note, or to the note? So the correct answer, I feel, is it goes below the note and to it. So if we're at a C, right? And so just making sure when you do that practice with the metronome that there is that focus, that you have a destination note that you're going to, as opposed to, okay, here's a C, and let's just vibrate, the crap out of it. Then in that way, you're not really developing anything except how fast you can create circles with your fingers. Okay. Let's see. How to practice tone. how to practice tone. I don't know if there's, I'm sure there's specific stuff you can do to practice tone. I would say probably the most basic thing you can do is making sure that you're playing with a good contact point, and that where it's neither, you know, unless you want it for coloristic reasons, right? Something like too close to the bridge, and, you know, sol tasto, it's not the best tone, right? It's a color or an effect. So just to practice it, I would say find that sweet spot, listen, use your ear, and really listen. And I tell my students, listen for the resonance. You don't ever want to choke the sound, right? What is the bow doing? If you envision the bow to consist of these tiny microscopic hairs, right? And that when you're pulling the bow or pushing it down bow, up bow across the string, it's really like pizzicato, right? The string is round, so it's engaging the string and it's pulling it and pushing it and making it vibrate back and forth. So if we use too dense a bow, too slow a bow speed, obviously, right, the sound chokes, right? And you know, that's that. That could be considered beautiful in certain new music circles. But, you know, in terms of conventional beautiful tone, I think that's not what we want to go for. So, couple things, very, very celloistic, specific cello things, making sure that the bow is straight, that you're not, you know, changing the location of the bow, making sure that the bow is always parallel to the bridge or the fingerboard, whatever is easier for you to see. That will create a consistent tone, keeping in mind the balance of bow weight as opposed to bow speed. That's too much weight and no speed. That's all speed and almost no weight. And so, you know, in terms of our practice, I think if you think about those points, then you're training your ear to listen for that resonance, listen for that beauty of resonance, right? And so once you hear it, you're going to always want it. And so train your ear to do that. I think that's probably the most interesting, most helpful thing you can do in terms of tone. Start with open strings, then add, you know, notes. Scales are good for that. Again, I like to play scales sometimes with a metronome, just to sort of subconsciously develop in me a sense of pulse, consistent pulse, but also to see how I can shape a note within a certain boundary, right? And so if you do that, I guarantee that your tone will improve. Okay, let's see. Okay. Hi, any advice on playing extensions? I'm a beginner and having difficulty getting to do it comfortably. Thanks. Okay. So here are 5 fingers, right? With the exception of the thumb. So which, between these, and these fingers, which do you think is the most easy to extend? Try it. For me, and I feel like for most other people, it's going to be here, between the first and the second fingers. So when you do extensions, I would say the motion would probably be instigated by this, and then maybe that, and then this, probably least of all. At least for myself, right? So when you're doing something like, I'm not thinking, oh, I just need to stretch out all my fingers. I'm just sort of, one aside, think about the thumb, right? Making sure that it's never just sort of planted. The thumb should always be limber and flexible. And I just extend. Been talking about my own practicing, and I think even as a beginner, that this could be a very, very good exercise for you. I've been really getting into Foyard Feuillard. He has this etude book, or scale book, I guess, for called Daily Exercises, and I believe it's part, I don't know, 9, 10, let's see, 11, no. Anyway, it doesn't matter, I can't find it right now, but it systematically goes through something like that, really sort of working all the variables, all the combinations that are possible, and so I find it, you can't do too much of it because it's pretty numbing, but I find the systematic use, how he approaches it, to be very, very helpful, and I really recommend using that etude book. Okay. When you start working on a new obscure piece, where do you start? How do you approach it, especially if you can't find any background information or recordings? That's actually a very good question, a very pertinent question right now. I mentioned at the very beginning that I've been working on a lot of solo repertoire, just for myself, just so I can learn it. And one of the pieces that I've been working on is the Schnicke improvisations. There's a lot of recordings out there, and I try not to listen to recordings before I work on a piece unless it's totally over my head. But with the Schnicke, I Googled it, and there's actually no real program notes specifically about the piece as well. So I really had to, just really sort of research it and discover it on my own, which I found to be really, really rewarding. And with any piece, whether it's a piece that is of a composer that is familiar, but I just haven't played, or a brand new piece, the first thing I do is I think about the form. I think form is very, very important to me. Knowing the architecture, how something is structured, is very, very important. So, start from the large sense. So how many movements is it? How are the movements organized? Fast, slow, whatever is that. And then let's go to the first movement, what form is this? Is this sonata allegro form? Is this through compose? Is it, whatever. And then, sort of working down in that way. What is the phrase? What is the motive? In the case of the Schnicke, what are the phrase lengths? What is the gesture? How are these pitches organized? And with the Schnicke, actually, I've been having a lot of fun. It jumps around a lot, and a lot of things. But actually, what I realized was that a lot of these notes are based on a scale, whether an ascending scale or a descending scale. It just happens to be something like that, and so that actually gave me a lot of perspective into the piece, and informed me as to what sort of phrases fit together, and what was a new gesture. You mentioned like obscure pieces, so I'm going to assume maybe they're like new contemporary pieces that no one's recorded or anything like that. So I would, do the same thing. Maybe I would listen to other pieces by the same composer, get into their language. Is your language evocative? Is it just sort of setting a mood, or or character or something? Is it gestural? Is it like Kurtag or Webern or the Schnicke? Is it melodic? Is it atonal? Is it polytonal? Is it what is the effect of it? Is it rhythmically driven? All these things. I think whatever context you can give yourself, I think will inform you as to how the piece should feasibly go. And obviously, with composers that are living, you can always reach out to them, or people who've worked with them, to get even deeper into their mind. Yeah. Okay, going down the list. strengthen the third finger in thumb position. Thank you. 1, 2, 3. You know, this is something I'm still struggling with, and I hope that, so I wish that someone would tell me how to do. But, you know, one thing that I found helpful, one thing that I found myself doing was that, you know, you see that the third finger is shorter, right, than the second. First 2 fingers are my strength fingers, and then with the third, especially in thumb position, I found that I was too far back this way. Because the third finger is shorter, I have to bring my hand in, my elbow in, and become a little bit more square to the cello, right? And so I don't ever advocate always playing, you know, with the rounded curved finger. In this way, I feel like you can sort of collapse the knuckle, and as long, or whatever, you know, maybe you're disjointed or whatever, but, you know, as long as you really feel like this knuckle joint, this one right here, is in a way supporting the finger, and you can really sort of, I hesitate to say press down, but that's sort of the feeling. You want to feel like you're sinking through the fingerboard in that way. And so if your third finger is too extended, then not only do you not have any strength, then you can't even vibrate. But if you're a little bit more square and the center of mass in your hand rests on the third finger, then I think you can sort of find much more strength that way. And you can already see the difference visually. Yeah, so I encourage you to try that. Okay, how can one practice breathing to make it coordinate with the music? Sometimes I feel like I'm holding my breath too much, especially in difficult passages. Okay, so number 1, once you realize that you're not breathing, breathe out, right? I think just always being conscious of your body and listening to it. When we forget to breathe, we notice that our neck goes up, our shoulders goes up, everything gets constricted, right? And so just breathing, feeling the connection of your feet on the ground, that you're really, really grounded, right? And then just feeling like, again, just sort of go back to basics. Hug the cello, hug it out, and then feel grounded to it, right? And then I think to be very, very specific, if you want to be very specific with yourself, you know, you can train yourself to breathe. You can write it in your music. If you're playing something, let's say, you know, you're playing Elgar second movement, and it keeps going, right? And so in your practice, you can write in your music after the end of, I don't know, the phrase or something, breathe out. And then just practice doing that while you play. With anything else, repetition makes habit, right? And so just the act of being conscious of it, I think, is already 50% of the progress. Okay. I guess your question was more about how to coordinate it with the music. I don't know. I don't know about coordinating, but yeah, I think just making sure that you're not holding anything in, right? And then when music is definitely exhaling, like right? You can sort of practice in that way. Okay. Question from our YouTube teacher in Charleston. Do you have any concerto recommendations for students that have just finished Allegro Appassionato by Saint-Saëns but not quite ready to start the Lalo or Saint-Saëns concertos? You know, I don't know if I'm familiar with Allegro Appassionato. I know that, you know, if perhaps Hide and See or Boccherini, B flat is not an option. If they want to work on a romantic concerto, maybe Kabalevsky. I remember really loving practicing that piece. Or even like Dvorak, Silent Woods or something like that. Or yeah, think those could be good. Yeah. Let's see. Can you give some advice about relaxation? I have a problem with my thumbs on both hands. Okay, tense a lot when I play very fast things or double stops, double strings, double stops. About relaxation. Again, this is sort of alluding to my previous response, just making sure that you're always conscious. It seems like you are conscious of when it is tight after the fact, but during, right? Before you get to the point where you can't play because it's so restricted, I think it's important to sort of, have those markers for yourself. Okay. And sort of in your own practice, notice when it is that you're getting tight, right? A lot of talk is given about how we need to play without any tension, but I feel like we are going to play with tension, right? The act of playing these string instruments isn't always like a very natural, inherently natural thing to do, right? And so there is going to be some tension. You just have to know to release that tension. Know those spots when you can release and sort of regain your strength. And then sort of related to the breathing too, right? Just being conscious of when that happens and making sure that you consciously relax yourself, I think is the first step. Okay, I just noticed it's 9:08 p.m. So I will, but I can definitely answer some more of these questions. Could you discuss backwards extensions? Yeah, that backwards extensions, I feel like same thing. I think if you think it's really instigated by this first two fingers, the extensions, as opposed to anything else. Yeah. Okay. Can you recall a specific piece of advice from any of your teachers that has proved to be particularly impactful throughout your career? Oh man, there's so much. I was really blessed to have really, really fantastic teachers who really cared and were very, very good at communicating and explaining, how to be a better cellist and how to be a better musician, a more informed, sensitive musician. I think I remember once as an undergrad, Larry Lesser said to me, I remember I want to play well, I want to be good, but I had no idea really how to achieve that. And so he said, well, find inspiration, and grossly paraphrasing, inspiration from your peers, from everything around you, and from listen to a lot of music, to a lot of great artists. And, if you like something that they do, take that, make it yours. If you like something else, take that as well, right? And so take a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and eventually, it's not, I'm not saying that you as an artist is just copying different aspects of different artists, but that will influence you to find your own artistic identity, and if nothing else, it will give you perspective, and it'll develop your sense of taste. And I found that actually to be really, really helpful, and sort of grounding in that way. Yeah. Okay. So maybe that's a good place to stop. Again, like I mentioned at the very beginning, these are very, very weird and crazy and lonely times, but they can't last forever, right? And so draw inspiration from music, from beauty in music, and we can use technology like we do right now to really inspire each other and to check up on each other, and still to communicate music and our love for it and our compassion for what's going on, and we can and don't ever forget that as musicians, that's what we do. We touch people in ways that are intangible and give much joy to their lives. So I think we can always just think about that role and have that guide us as well, so that we never fall into despair or hopelessness. So so thanks very much, and I hope everybody stays well and safe and healthy. Take care.